Welcome to the second episode of the Spirit of Apollo Lunar Module. Today we're going to build Bag 2 from the model, and then we're going to talk a little bit about how the astronauts got from the Earth to the Moon and back. So here is the completed Bag 2 from the model. It consists of the interior and some of the exterior of the descent stage of the lunar module. A couple of interesting features to note. You'll notice these 4 tanks in here. Those are actually the fuel tanks for the descent stage. In order to have combustion in space where there's no oxygen, you not only have to bring the fuel, but you also have to bring the oxidizer. That's why there's 2 different colors of tanks there. Some other interesting features to note: there's this little part over here. This is actually a camera. This would be the camera that recorded the astronauts' first steps on the moon. And then on the other side over here is a storage area for the experiments the astronauts are going to do, including a laser experiment that I will talk about in a later episode. Now let's take a detailed look at the path that the astronauts use on their trip from the Earth to the Moon. The process the Apollo landing missions used to get to lunar orbit and back was similar to that used by Apollo 8, which I described in my video, Earthrise, Apollo 8 Mission Profile. The astronauts in their Apollo Command and Service Module, or CSM, were launched into Earth orbit from Kennedy Space Center aboard the Saturn V, a giant 3-staged rocket. The first 2 stages fell into the ocean once their fuel was exhausted. After a few orbits of the Earth, the 3rd stage of the rocket, the S-4B, would reignite and put the Apollo spacecraft on its path to the Moon. After this trans-lunar injection, the CSM would separate from the S-4B and turn around. In Apollo 8, there was no lunar module. On all the later missions, the S-4B carried the lunar module, LM or LEM, in a compartment under the CSM. This includes Apollo 9, which was a mission that stayed in Earth orbit, and Apollo 10, which was considered to be a dress rehearsal for the landing without actually landing. The lunar module was a 2-stage vehicle that was intended to take the astronauts from lunar orbit to the surface of the Moon and back. Getting back to the mission profile, after the LEM was exposed, the CSM would dock with the LEM. The LEM would then separate from the S-4B. By the way, the specific times and details in this presentation come from the Apollo 11 mission profile. When the spacecraft arrived at the Moon, the astronauts would execute a lunar orbit insertion maneuver on the far side. This involved firing the CSM's engine in a direction opposite their direction of motion, so the spacecraft would be slowed down and fall into orbit around the Moon. In preparation for landing, the lunar module pilot and mission commander would climb into the LEM and activate its systems. This included extending the LEM's landing gear. On Apollo 11's 13th orbit of the Moon, while on the far side of the Moon, the command module and lunar module undocked. Before the undocking procedure, a small amount of air was accidentally left in the tunnel connecting the 2 spacecraft. When released by undocking, this air gave a small extra push to the lunar module, giving it a little extra speed that was not accounted for by the LM's navigation computer. Later Apollo missions had procedures in place to make sure the tunnel was completely vented before separation. On their 14th orbit of the moon, the LEM fired its descent engine against the direction of travel to put the LEM in an elliptical orbit. This was done while the LEM was on the far side of the moon, so that the low point of the orbit, known as the perilune, would be on the near side of the moon. The perilune would be about 9 miles above the surface. Powered descent initiation, or PDI, began when the lunar module was at perilune. The timing of PDI was critical to where the lander would eventually touch down. During Apollo 11, because of the errors that had crept into the navigation calculations of the guidance system, including those caused by incomplete venting prior to separation, the start of power descent was a few seconds late, when the LEM was farther downrange than was intended. As the lunar module Eagle approached the surface, Commander Neil Armstrong noticed that the computer was aiming towards a site on the near side of a large crater, surrounded by large boulders. He decided to fly over the crater. At 500 feet above the surface, Armstrong took manual control. Let's listen in starting at 200 feet.
Forward, coming down nicely, 200 feet, 4.5 down, 5.5 down. 160 feet, 6.5 down, 5.5 down, 9 forward. Good. 120 feet. 100 feet, 3.5 down, 9 forward. 5%. How many bites? Okay, 75 feet. Star's looking good, down a half. 6 forward. 60 seconds. Lights on. 6. Down 2.5. Forward. Forward. That's 40 feet, down 2.5. Picking up some dust. 30 feet, 2.5 down. Straight shadow. 4 forward. 4 forward. Drift into the right a little. 20, down a half. 30 seconds. Forward. Good. Okay. Contact light. Okay, engine stop. ATA at a descent. Power control both auto. Descent engine command override off. Engine arm off. 413 is in. We copy you down, Eagle. Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
Because of the navigational issues I mentioned, and because Neil Armstrong had to avoid a crater in the final moments of the landing, the Eagle landed about 6.6 kilometers past the center of their target area, but still within the area. And as Neil Armstrong said later, it wasn't a big deal as to exactly where we were going to set down. There wasn't going to be any welcoming committee for us there anyway. Until next time, Godspeed.